I've worked as a repairman for the last 3 years. Ever since I got out of high school, I've not been that eager to go get a 9-to-5 job or flip burgers or anything like that. I like being on my own time with minimal supervision. Being a repairman works out great for me. I can take odd jobs here and there while I try to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. One day I got a call from a friend who said that he knew someone that had just bought some land and needed somebody to gut an abandoned building on the property. Not exactly a repair job, depending on how you look at it, but after getting all the details I agreed and took the job. The project was to gut an abandoned church so that it could be converted into something else. A storage building? A cabin? I didn't know and didn't really care. My job was to gut it down to its bones, and then from there, it was somebody else's problem. When I pulled in the first day, I immediately got the creeps. The church sat at the end of a long dirt driveway, off a road less traveled, and in the middle of nowhere. Looking at the building, it wasn't very large, but I was a one-man crew, so I figured it would take at least 3 days to get gutted out. The moment I stepped inside, the place felt off. It still had that typical abandoned building feel, though. Graffiti on the wall, broken glass, and cigarette butts on the floor, the usual. After giving the place a brief look around, I started unloading tools and got to work. Nothing unusual the first morning. I worked until noon and then drove into town to get a bite to eat for lunch. When I came back, however, there were the first signs that something was going on. Some of my tools had been moved. At first, I just chalked it up to absent-mindedness. Maybe I moved them myself and just wasn't paying attention. But then I noticed that some of them were laying in the front yard. I definitely didn't do that. Someone for sure had to have been there. Thinking about the graffiti and cigarette butts, I told myself it was probably a couple of stupid kids and went about my business, though I was a little bit more on alert. The rest of the day went by without any issues, and I turned in before it started getting dark. I packed up my expensive tools but left some of the larger things: a ladder, a chair, and a fold-out table, just to name a few. When I returned the next day, it again felt like someone had been there. The ladder that I had left leaning up against the wall was now in the floor, and my chair was tipped over. I was part annoyed, and part spooked as well. This place was out in the middle of nowhere, and it had such a creepy vibe. The building itself, the land, its location, it all made my skin crawl, just to be honest. I didn't feel that there was much that I could do about it, so I just straightened everything up and got back to work. This day was a little bit different, though. I started hearing strange noises. At first they were coming from the nearby woods, then it sounded like they were coming from right outside the church. I'd look around and there was nothing. I repeatedly told myself not to worry about it. Maybe it was just a deer or something. I think deep down inside, though, I knew something was way off about this place. Again, I finished up before dark and headed out. The next day, I brought out a generator. I wanted to be done with this place, and I anticipated that I might be working a little bit later in order to finish up and not have to come back again the next day. I worked as quickly as I could the entire day. I kept one eye on what I was working on and another on my surroundings. As it got later into the evening and the sun started going down, I took a moment to weigh my options. I could either hook my lights up to the generator, work late into the night, and get everything done, or come back the next morning to finish up. I wanted out of this place, so I figured I'd just hook the lights up and get it done. It would be a decision that I would later regret. It was dark now, and I only had a few more hours of work left. I was grinding away when, out of nowhere, the generator cut out and the lights along with it. It was almost pitch black. It happened so quickly that my eyes didn't have time to adjust to the darkness, if that makes sense. My first thought was that the generator had run out of gas. But then I thought to myself, that's impossible. I just filled it up, and there's no way it could have used all of the gas up already. I was somewhat puzzled. As I was trying to make my way over to the generator, it happened. I heard a young woman's voice. It was slithery, it was terrifying, and it said one word: "Leave." I spun around. I'm the type of person that reacts aggressively when I'm frightened. My words get loud and deep. I stand erect and puff out my chest and try to intimidate back whatever is frightening me. But deep down inside, I'm shaking to my core. "Who the freak is freaking with me?" I yelled out. except I didn't use the word freak, if you know what I mean. For a second, there was nothing. It was dead quiet. What happened next, though, would have me questioning what reality is for the rest of my life. In my peripheral, I saw some movement, barely illuminated by what little bit of moonlight there was. I turned my head to look over. In the corner of the house was a figure, best as I could describe. It looked to be a young woman. Her hair was parted straight down the middle. Her clothes were tattered and looked to be from the late 1800s or early 1900s. She looked menacing and didn't look like she was happy at all. But what really got me were the eyes. You see, there were none. They were dark and hollow, and there was absolutely nothing where the eyes should have been. Before I could even process my own thoughts, my legs were ushering me out the front door. I was screaming hysterically. Not something I want to admit, but if I'm going to tell my story the way that it happened, then that's what happened. I jumped into my old pickup truck and started scrambling for my keys. I couldn't find them. I started to hyperventilate as I was looking for them. Then I realized something. I had left them, along with my phone, on the fold-up table inside the church. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had two choices. Either make a mad dash back in there to retrieve them, or make a mad dash down the dirt driveway on foot. Whichever option I chose would require that it be done in near pitch-black darkness. I opted for the keys and the phone. I felt like it gave me a better chance to get out of there more quickly. The other option left me running down a long, dark road in the middle of nowhere. I threw the driver's side door open, ran back in as quickly as I could, and dove for my keys and phone. Luckily, my eyes had somewhat adjusted to the darkness now, and I could make out where the table was. Pivoting to head back towards my truck, I took a glance at the corner that this woman, or whatever you want to call it, was. There was nothing. She, or it, or whatever it was gone. Part of me was relieved, and the other part was gripped with fear. If she wasn't there in the corner, where was she? I didn't want to waste any more time trying to figure it out. I burst back out the front door and back into my truck. I hit the ignition and it fired up with no issues. I threw it in reverse and mashed the gas pedal to the floorboard. I cut a 180, and when my truck came to a stop, she was there, in my headlights, about 15 feet away, directly in front of me. This time, every ounce of detail was visible. Just as I had seen before, she had long dark hair. She was wearing a tattered dress, and her eyes were completely hollow. There was one other detail this time, though. Where there should have been feet, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. She was floating about 6 inches off the ground. Where there should have been feet coming out of the bottom of her dress, there was nothing. I screamed out, "What the?" and the F word. I raised my left hand up over my eyes with my palm turned outwards, kind of the way that someone would raise up their hand to look in the direction of a really bright light, or the sun or something. It was instinctual. I didn't even really think about it. I guess part of me didn't want to see what was about to happen next. I wanted out of there. She was between me and my exit, and I wasn't going to take any more time making any more decisions. I slammed on the gas and headed straight for her. With my hand up blocking my view, I squinted a little bit, anticipating some type of impact or thud or something. But as I accelerated forward, there was nothing. No thud, no bump, no scream, nothing. All I could hear was the sound of gravel and dirt being launched from my back tires. As I darted forward for what felt like probably 60 or 70 feet, I finally put my hand down, and all I could see out in front of me was the dirt driveway. I glanced into my rearview mirror and saw nothing. I flew down the driveway, out onto the road, and drove straight home in record time. The rest of the night was a daze. When my adrenaline dump finally wore down, I was completely exhausted, but at the same time, I was too terrified to sleep. At some point, though, I guess the exhaustion got the better of me because I finally passed out. The next morning, I called in to the property owner. I told him that I couldn't make it back because I was sick. At the time, I didn't feel like it was a lie. The events of the prior night had left me completely out of it, and there was no force on earth that could get me to go back to that property. We had a brief discussion, and I detailed to him what little work was left to do. After a little bit of back and forth, we came to an agreement that the job was done. I made no mention of the woman or the events of that night. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I wasn't going back, so as far as I was concerned, that building was now somebody else's problem. Later that day, I called my friend and told him the same thing. I was sick. I asked if he could retrieve my gear. I had left behind the generator, lights, and all kinds of tools. I did feel bad about that request, sending my friend out there to risk running into whatever that thing was. But again, at the time I was out of my mind, and there was no way I was stepping foot back on that property. Luckily, my friend was able to retrieve my gear without incident. I will never ever forget what I saw that night. Up until this point, I've refrained from using the word ghost. I've never believed in that kind of stuff, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what else I would call it. I will tell you one thing though, flipping burgers suddenly doesn't sound like that bad of a gig. Thanks for tuning into another episode from the Alley of Nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Until next time,